Welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe. Today we have a very important guest. He is a rabbi of New London Synagogue in England, and he's a graduate of Conservative Yeshiva and Jewish Theological Seminary, and he wrote a very interesting article that attracted my attention. He wrote it 4 years ago almost. The principle that wasn't a re-evaluation of the matrilineal principle in biblical and rabbinic Judaism. Rabbi, welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe. Could you
Alexander, thank you. Nice to be here.
thank you for stopping by? Uh, uh, what did you want to say? We're going to attach this article, link to this article right below this video so people will be able to read it in full. But why did you write this article? What moved you to write this article?
It's actually even longer ago than that I wrote it. I wrote it for a course that I took at the Jewish Theological Seminary, I think now 23 years ago, where we were asked to find something that had a process of a history as it unfolded through Judaism, particularly in the move from the biblical period into classic rabbinical periods, and to try and understand how it moved. So for example, Shabbat, which in the Bible, you have to keep it, but you don't know how. But by the time you get to the end of the rabbinic period, you have rules about an eruv and rules about cooking and exactly what you can and can't pre-cook, keep warm, and understanding the way that Judaism changes and unfolds is key to my Jewish identity. So I'm a member of a Masuti rabbinic organization, and I lead a Masuti synagogue. That's the same as conservative in America. But Limsor is the process of an unfolding development of something as it moves from one generation to another. And I wanted to look at this issue of status. It's obviously spectacularly important, and it obviously traps people hugely, particularly in a kind of contemporary world where there are different standards of conversions, different marriages that are happening both inside Jewish communities and inside Jewish communities and from Jewish communities to other Jewish communities. And the real reason why I got into it was that I was brought up with a one-line version of what I'm calling the matrilineal principle. So the one-line version of the matrilineal principle is that someone is Jewish because of their mother. If their mother is Jewish, they're Jewish. And if their mother isn't Jewish, even if their father is Jewish, they're not halakhically Jewish. And that was how I was brought up. And the first thing that I realized as I was just kind of going about my rabbinic education is that if you read the central Mishnah that begins to articulate this, that's not what that Mishnah says. And if you then try and work out where you get this principle from, it gets very confusing. And then along the way, I came across what was at the time, merely a major article, but subsequently became part of an important book from the leading scholar of the first century Jewish existence, Professor Shai Cohen, who I think just got it wrong. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I actually sent him my article. I haven't had a response. It was 25 years ago. Maybe I should again. But what Professor Cohen did, and any number of academics who've looked at this, is that they start in the biblical period. And when you start in the biblical period, people are simply not Jewish because their mother is Jewish. Actually, the very word Jewish doesn't really make much sense in the biblical period. In my article, I talk about being a Hebrew or being an Israelite, but people aren't a Hebrew or an Israelite because their mother is Jewish. They are a Hebrew or an Israelite because their father is Jewish. That goes for Abraham, who is the first Hebrew, no record of Sarah converting. It goes for Isaac. It goes, it goes for Rachel, Leah. And as you make your way through, I
It
have
goes
my
for all the offsprings of Judah.
Exactly who is and who isn't always clear. But for example, Joseph marries Asnat, who is Egyptian. And you can go through the totality of the Hebrew Bible, well into, I don't know, I mean, Second Samuel 17:25, Amasa. You can go through First Kings. Rehoboam's mother is an Ammonite woman, and you can just go through and just see that in the biblical periods, the technical term I think is patrilocal, which is to say that your national identity and your religious identity depends on where your father lives. I remember spending time in Ghana a long time ago, living off grid with the International Jewish College Corps, and it was very clear to me that when you got married, you left your father's house, as it says in Genesis. You, as a woman, you moved into a different father's house, and you entered into that kind of zone of identity, and that seems to be what was happening in the Torah, broadly conceived, the Hebrew Bible, Tanakh. And then again, you can see that again into what the Christians called the intertestamental period, into the Apocrypha, the pre-rabbinic periods. And I can do this in any number of ways, and just coming up into the beginning of the rabbinic period, the two most interesting figures who are around that we have records of are Philo and Josephus, neither of whom articulate anything like a matrilineal principle, and sometimes articulate things that are different. So you haven't got it until you get into the rabbinic time. When you get into the rabbinic time, you come to the Mishnah, and those of us who know,
Uh,
something about rabbinic
uh,
Judaism.
uh, Jeremy, rabbinic times. This is the time of destruction of the Second Temple,
Right,
of the
exactly.
loss of the Jewish state.
Exactly.
So,
But and it's a national tragedy, but it's also an absolute flip in terms of how Judaism functions and is regulated. So pre-destruction of the temple, you've got the priests, you've got sacrificial systems, and a huge amount of focus on this thing called Tuma and Tahara, ritual purity, ritual impurity. With the fall of the temple, nobody's sacrificing anymore. The priests are not the leaders of the Jewish people anymore. And all this stuff about ritual purity, almost, right? I mean, there are exceptions, but it almost all changes. And in its place arise rabbis who are kind of the bearers of what counts as properly Jewish. Exactly. All of this is slightly generalized. Prayer, and a Torah Shebaal Peh, an oral Torah which begins to be held as a canonical document, rabbinic Judaism, specifically and principally through the Mishnah. So this is between the years of 70 and 200. And in a section of the Mishnah about Kiddushin, about marriage, again, that's not quite a perfect translation, the rabbis articulate, and quite rarely with no disagreement, the Mishnah is full of disagreement, they acknowledge four sets of marital or connubial or childbearing status, depending on the status of the various people involved. And the interesting thing for me to kind of like realize, and I remember it kind of like hit me very strongly, is that the first one where it says sheyesh kiddushin ve'ein avera, if there is like a wedding which is a legally acceptable wedding, havlad holach achar zachar, the child goes according to the status of the father, and it's just like that's the principle. So in my case, both my parents aren't Jewish. They neither one was married to somebody else when they had a child with me with my other parent. It was a kosher wedding, and therefore I am Jewish. And my status goes halach achar hazachar. It goes after the father. So, for example, when I'm called to the Torah, I'm called in the name of my father. And my mother is the child of two Levis, but yet I'm a Yisrael, right? I'm not of the tribe of Levi because my tribal
you
identity.
have been forced down on the ladder of.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm happy with that, and that seems to me, and it seems to me to be important and significant That's the principle of Judaism, and I'm very proud to have supported two communities in becoming fully egalitarian. I work with the first female rabbi to work in the Mazuti British community in a congregation, and I would absolutely say there is massive androcentrism and actually, a good dose of misogyny that you can find in rabbinic Judaism, and it's sadly just not the case that the matrilineal
Rabbi,
principle,
I just want to ask you a small question. Uh, which Tanakh do you use in your services?
which Tanakh.
Yeah,
I mean, which Chumash do we use? We use the Eitz Chaim. I mean, if that's the question.
Etz Chaim. Guess who made this Etz Chaim?
I mean, the American conservative movement. I don't know who you mean.
I made it for them.
Ah, yeah, fair. What was your role?
I took their text and we edited it and we put it together and we created the book for them.
Lovely. I mean, I have to say, it's a beautiful book, and
And the Hebrew text of that Etz Chaim is our copyright in the same way as JPS Tanakh, Hebrew English text. Hebrew text is ours.
who's us?
Me, Varda Graphics.
Did the graphic work? For Kol Kavod. I mean, very, very, thank you.
But
Um,
let's continue. I just
Yeah,
wanted
yeah,
to
yeah.
put
So
it
the
in.
first stage, the first stage is the stage of what the rabbis sort of is the principled state of rabbinic Judaism. And then you then get these kind of gray areas. There doesn't need to be a question as to what happens if a non-Jew has a child with a non-Jew. It just doesn't arise. But the gray areas, and I just think it's interesting just to kind of acknowledge what's going on. If there is somebody who has a child with somebody else and they couldn't have had a child with them, but they could have had a child with someone else. The Mishnah says that's a mamzer. I mean, I'll say a word about that in a second, but that's the case of somebody who's already married to somebody else, but they have a child with somebody else, or various other kind of categories. Also, if a Cohen has a child with a widow, this is again a kind of like a halakhic problem. That child's not a mamzer, but it says achar hapigum. It goes in a direction of being difficult. And then it gives you these kind of other cases, including the case that if somebody has, if a male Jew has a child with a non-Jew, the child is a non-Jew. Now, the case that I say in the article is that this isn't a principle of matrilineal inheritance, the supremacy of the matrilineal importance. It's a case of an excluded middle, which is something that the rabbis do a lot, which is that if they want something to work properly and you mess it up, they say it goes out. That's not and you can feel that if you know Ezra and Nehemiah, like Ezra and Nehemiah also is not happy with these sorts of situations and they cast these people out. Now, you know, that means that someone with non
Yes, they cast those people out, including children, but they don't say, we do not call those children his. This is what already rabbis starting to do. They deny the paternity of those children. Those children are orphans, born orphans.
I mean, I don't know exactly what was going on at the time. And I also don't know exactly what's going on in the history of Judaism. I mean, a lot of these texts are coming into being at a time when Jews are so politically disempowered, right? They're coming into a time when there's all kinds of power in the world that is not vested in Jews, not only in the kind of the Roman world, but also quite early on in the Christian world. So it's very hard to know exactly who's ending up where and what the lived results of some of these issues are. Obviously, people can be caused tremendous pain, and
But
that's
we
never
know
good.
we know the same thing was in ancient Greece and in ancient Rome. Exactly
And
the
I
same
mean,
thing.
listen, and maybe even in this contemporary time, where people are very excited about checking people's passports and visas and birth statuses. I mean, these are not new challenges to
Rabbi,
try.
Rabbi, Rabbi, in the United States of America, in this country of freedom, equality, etc., until 1867, in southern states governed by the laws of state of Virginia, the status of child was according to mother. Why? Because many children were offsprings of the slave owner and a nice looking young slave girl who was hated by the wife of the slave owner and was telling the slave owner, get rid of this child or kill him.
I mean, right. I mean, I acknowledge that. I mean, maybe that's a chance for me to say something else, which I think I'd heard growing up Jewishly, which as I began to understand more about rabbinic Judaism, I realized is untrue. Right? One of the things that you would hear if you were growing up like me in England in the late 1970s, 1980s, was that the reason why the matrilineal principle existed was that you knew from which womb a child emerged, right? That there could be certainty.
This is exactly the logic of ancient Rome. Exactly the logic of ancient Rome.
But the
And I have
interesting
to say, Rabbi, that our God with this logic is a moron. Why?
Well, right, okay, so therefore it's worth saying that this is not a Jewish perspective. It's simply not, and it's very, very clear in the Mishnah, it's in Mishnah in Kiddushin, that you just assume the Jewish status of somebody, there's also these sort of categories of a foundling, right? If you find a child in the street, you assume they're Jewish if the majority of the people in the area are Jewish. So the rabbis just don't have that concern.
And
Um,
if only 10 out of 100 are not Jewish, then the child is not Jewish.
no, the child is Jewish. No, other way around. Other way around. It's a Mishnah in Kiddushin. The rabbis aren't bothered by certainty. They're just not. They're on an issue like this. So I want to do just the other side of this,
But
right?
but
So,
but
so,
but
so
Rabbi,
there
they're
is,
not also bothered by the fact that God threatens death to us for abuse of orphans. That is Exodus.
they are. I mean, listen. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I understand some of the contemporary implications of what is happening with um, people holding forth on what Jewish status is and isn't, in ways that can be very, very painful. I understand that, and I'm not, I disassociate myself from a lot of that. I'm not part of a chief rabbinate in the UK, and I'm certainly not part of the Rabbinate Rashid in Israel. And I think that some of the things that have been done in the name of a kind of purity of Judaism by some of those organizations are wrong. I mean, not even morally
When was it?
wrong,
I was
halakhically wrong.
speaking to Rabbi Lau a while back when he was chief rabbi, Ashkenazi rabbi in Israel. And that is right after he told Haaretz newspaper about a guy who was a Jewish guy from Russia who was buried somewhere in Germany and who offsprings, including their family, 78, were, according to this Rabbi Lau, whose father I liked a lot, were polluting the Jewish state. Now,
Yeah, I don't
I,
I don't use any of that language, and I'm not here to defend it. I mean, what I would say is
uh,
I don't think that that's an accurate read of what the Masorah says. What our Jewish halakhic tradition encourages us to do
go
is
ahead,
not that thing.
Rabbi.
So,
Tell us what the Masorah says. Tell us what we should make when we consult Jewish law, trying to answer this question.
yeah, let me do one other thing before I get to that because I've left this partly open, right? So there is a Mishnah which clearly says that if a Jewish man has a child with a Jewish woman, the child goes after the non-Jew, right? And becomes therefore not Jewish. But I don't think that's a principle of matrilineality. I think that's a case of an excluded middle.
Of
If you
excluded
want
what? Excluded what?
an excluded middle, a gray case where the rabbis say, and maybe your analogy of these slave children, I mean, again, these words are horrible, right? Mulatto, some of these kinds of cases, is applicable here. I'm stepping aside from the moral claim on it at all.
Oh my God!
Yeah,
By the way, I have to say, Rabbi, the thing about the treatment of slaves by Jews, the slaves that Jewish family owned, not only in Rome but in Babylonia, was horrific, and it is in Talmud.
I have to say I can't. I don't want to get into that today. There's a
Okay.
much fuller conversation to have about that. To do the other side of it, which is to say, where in rabbinic Judaism do we learn that a child who has a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father is Jewish? Now, interestingly, most of the academic work that was done on this doesn't cite this at all. And even Professor Cohen doesn't treat this other side of the challenge with sufficient
So,
attention, I
mother
think.
is Jewish, father is not, and what is the status of the child then?
So in the Mishnah, in the second century, the child is deemed to be a mamzer. Now, the mamzer is not.
Until the accepted ruling of Rabbi Tmani.
I'll get to that, but hold,
Okay.
hold, hold up a second, right? And it's another version of an excluded middle, by which I mean this. A mamzer is someone who is not permitted to enter into the congregation of Israel. I mean, it's many more things. And again, there's a lot of emotional
A
pain
mamzer is a
involved here.
Jew, but not marriageable to other uh, Jews who are without taint.
That's a very good definition. So it's a way of again, I think, expressing a distaste of the relationship and slightly pushing the child of that relationship away. Now, whether or not that's morally acceptable or not, I don't want to get into, but I think that's what's happening in the Mishnah and Yevamot. Now, that again is not the matrilineal principle, and that again is not saying that a person is Jewish because their mother is Jewish.
By the way, as long as we move to Yevamot, you mean Yevamot 98a, right?
No, I mean this is a Mishnah 7:2. I think it's like
Okay, so but
42 or something.
Yevamot 98a says that the child has no father. That is, the child of Jewish woman and non-Jewish man has no father.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but actually, the halacha doesn't end there, right? So I mean, so, I mean,
I
I
understand.
hear your interest in this, and I hear your desire
My
to engage in
interest,
some of the.
because Rabbi, we have created today. There's millions and millions of people who were born to intermarriages. Now, I have to tell you this: as a matter of principle, I'm against intermarriage because it destroys our people. But the children should not be punished for the sins of the parents.
I agree with you, and let me just finish this point, right?
Okay.
Because having stated that in the Mishnah, the rabbis just row that away. And you get this, and I detail it in the paper. You get rabbi after rabbi after rabbi who says this child is not a mamzer. Now they don't explain why, they don't explain how. They simply state that the child is not a mamzer. For what it's worth, not a mamzer, but a sula kahuna, which is a very strange halakhic status, that you're fully Jewish, you can marry a Levi, you can marry a Yisrael, but you can't marry a Cohen. In the United Kingdom, under the hegemony of the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, um, if you have a non-Jewish father, you will still be denied marriage to a Cohen if you happen to have fallen in love with a Cohen, right? We pick up in the Masorti movement a number of people in this situation. So That's to say, A, nobody says that the child of a Jewish man and a sorry, of a non-Jewish man and a Jewish mother is a mamzer. Nobody says that. But there is still a taint. And even kind of like putting the whole thing together, it certainly ain't a principle.
Rabbi,
It's
there's a taint. There's a taint. But what I said when I mentioned Yevamot 98a, I said that that child is an orphan. He has no father, according to Yevamot 98a.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. And when we call somebody like that up in a synagogue, right? Let's say that, a nice non-Jew Chris has a child with a nice Jew Miriam. When we call such a person up to the Torah in the synagogue, let's say the person's name is Yaakov, we would call them up as Yaakov ben Miriam. Now, that's not to say that I don't think they have a father. When we've done bar mitzvahs for people like that in our community and we do them regularly, we are very, very deliberately concerned to acknowledge the incredible role that a non-Jewish father plays in raising a Jewish child. In some ways, I think it's an even greater miracle, right? Because if you really love football, you're going to raise your kid up to be a footballer. If you really love Judaism, you'll raise your kid up to be an engaged Jew. If you're not Jewish and you raise your kid up to be a committed Jew, and the bar mitzvah standards we have at New London are high, that's truly worth
Rabbi,
being proud of.
this is very, very wonderful that you do those things. But do you also point to that guy or girl, whatever, that his mother is Zona?
No, no. I mean, for what it's worth, my colleague Rabbi Natasha Mann is starting a PhD dissertation on the concept of zona, and she has lots of things to say about that as a term, which I think is often
I'd love
misunderstood.
to talk to her.
You can reach out. Um, so what you end up with by the close of the rabbinic period is a situation where a non-Jewish father and a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother is not Jewish,
A
and
child
a
is not
non
Jewish. A child is not.
yeah,
Okay.
and a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father having been articulated by the Mishnah as a mamzer, and again with no argument, that moves through the first three generations of the Moraim, so we're up to around about the year 350, is then defined as being kasher,
Hmm.
aval asur kahuna, so a kosher Jew but forbidden from marrying a Kohen, and that's the kind of, as it were, that's the closing of the rabbinic unfolding
Because the
on.
principle they keep, the Roman law principle that mother is known.
Yeah, I don't think it's because of that.
Okay,
I
go
don't think it's
ahead.
because of that.
In your article, you actually contradicted Professor Cohen on that point. This, which for me was your point was very good.
I appreciate that, and I mean, let me just, I also argue that the possible Roman influence on rabbinic seems a
Yeah.
poor explanation, where the centrality of matrilineality is downgraded and its development is understood as partial and disparate, right? So half of it's in Kiddushin, half of it's in Yevamot, and I think those two parts are separated by about 200 years. So Ulpian states in clear terms that if there is connubium between parents, the child always follows the father. In the absence of connubium, they follow the condition of the mother.
Rabbi, for our listeners, connubium means that they have the right to marry.
Yeah, it's a kind of like a kosher wedding,
Yeah.
right? A Roman kosher wedding.
Yeah.
Roman meets, free Roman marrying free Roman.
Right.
Um, but it just doesn't match. It just doesn't match what's going on here. By the way, for what it's worth, I don't think that the Professor Cohen likes likes the idea that the Jews got it from the Romans either. He doesn't think that that's the real
He
issue
does not think, but
either.
he talks that way as if it was. And I have to say, it does not directly go from Roman law. I agree with you on that point of view. But as Roman law was devised in order to protect the legitimate marriage, so in my mind, all of these Jewish laws have been devised in order to protect the legitimate Jewish marriage.
I think that's right, right, and that kind of goes back to Ezra and Nehemiah again. where
Well,
Ezra.
Nehemiah is a different thing. That was not the case. I mean, in fact, between Ezra and Nehemiah, there's huge difference, and they have completely different understanding of who belongs and who doesn't belong. But what I'm talking about, and what is of great interest to me, is that, of course, Rabbi Shimon and his interpretation, of Deuteronomy 7:3, etc., plays role, but everybody overlooks Shmot, Exodus 22, 22, 24. Punishment for abuse of widows and orphans is violent death. That is the promise of God. Violent death. Here today, we not only abuse orphans, we produce millions of judicial orphans at birth.
I mean, one of the things that I try and do, and I work both as a leader of a community in London and as part of the Masorti community in Britain, and I sit on the Bet Din of the European Masorti Bet Din, is that we simply don't set things up that way. And what we talk about a lot when we're dealing with these Jewish, right, people who have extensive, often Jewish identities, people who are coming from the former Soviet Union, lots of Holocaust related stories, lots of stories of people who with a Jewish father who loved them and took them to shul every week and taught them Hebrew and gave and they arrive as young adults, not knowing that they're not Jewish, just that their mother was not Jewish. By the way, adding into this surrogacies.
It seems like recently, maybe a year ago in England, there was a case like this where father sued the Jewish school on behalf of his child, no?
I know that case very well. Right. So there is a hegemony problem in Judaism. Which is to say that in many jurisdictions, and America is unusual in this not being the case, but certainly in Israel and also in the United Kingdom, the Orthodox hold a certain kind of political power which they wield. For me as a Masorti Jew sitting outside of that, we talk very much about, sometimes we use the phrase a hashlamah from that root shalom, that if somebody, for example, has a kind of a halakhic impediment in their Jewish status. Let me take the example of IVF or surrogacy, right? Somebody turns around to me at the age of somebody finds out at the age of 16 that the people that they've always thought of as their father and their mother, they were actually born from a surrogate, and they're only finding this out now. And throughout their entire life, the people they hold as their mother and father, who are Jewish, they're now suddenly finding that there's a halakhic impediment that needs address. We don't say that such a person is A, not Jewish, and B, needs a conversion. We say that they need a hashlamah. They need to come to a bet din, which should be welcoming and supportive and serious, but a place where those problems can be solved. I mean, to go to the problem of these Jews from the former Soviet Union who are arriving in Israel, you understand, I'm sure I can hear it in your accent. I don't know your story, far better than I. This problem was almost solved, by Orthodox rabbis as well, right? By Rabbi Drachman in particular, who really came up with.
But he passed away, and he no longer there, and he does not.
I'm not. By the way, I'm not saying. I'm sorry. Let me just finish. It was It could have been sorted out in a halachically serious way, and the fact that it wasn't, I share with you, is a tremendous embarrassment to me. But I know, I'm.
Rabbi, I'm sorry. The main problem cannot be solved through conversion, cannot be solved through anything like what you just mentioned. Cannot. Why? A child of Jewish father and non-Jewish mother, according to Kiddushin 68b, is not his son, therefore not Jewish. He is a child of this non-Jewish mother. Now,
I understand. I understand that you're seeing a verse that says that this person is an orphan, this person doesn't have a father. I just don't think that is right to say that they are. I mean, I think they lack a status within Judaism. I mean, I'll give you another example. There is an argument about the name that you call somebody up to the Torah with if they have a Jewish father, a non-Jewish mother, and they subsequently come to a Bet Din and convert, right?
If they come to Beit Din and convert to Jewish court and convert, they're not becoming a child of that father.
We absolutely do that. We absolutely do that. I mean,
Why?
the
They're,
different.
they're, they're children of Abraham and Sarah, not of
No, we
their
don't. We
son.
don't. We don't. I hear what you're saying. I know there are B'tei Din. I know there are serious Jewish engagement which says that they're not the child of their birth father.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't agree with
And
it.
there's all kinds of laws regulating it and throwing
It's
this
not.
out.
It's and there are multiple
And
opinions
on,
on the
and on
issue.
top of it, there's no such thing as adoption of a child in Jewish law.
There is.
There
There
is.
is. Listen, I'm going to have to go, but I'll give you this one, right?
Okay.
There are two people. I remember the first time when I was asked to support a regularization of Jewish status for a kid who was adopted. And it was very moving because I knew the couple and they were infertile. They were trying to have children for many, many years, and they finally had a child. And the way that it tends to work in the UK is they had a child that they were able to adopt, right? It takes a long time. You go through fostering.
Adopt under English law, not
Yeah,
under
yeah, yeah.
Jewish law.
Well, give me a second. I'll get there, I
Okay.
promise. And I knew this child. This child had been around in this family for 2 or 3 years when they'd finally finished all the civil English legal procedures. And they said, "Listen, can you help us sort this out Jewishly?" And I said, "Oh goodness, I don't know anything about adoption." And so I went to this book. I remember it very well. I went to Isaac Klein's Jewish Practice, or a book of Jewish Practice, whatever it's called. Great book, great book. And I looked up adoption, and it said there are two people who are raised by their non-birth parents who raise them as parents. Do you know who they are?
No, I don't. Well, are you talking about Rabbi Akiva? No, because the Rabbi Akiva, depending on who talks about it,
Before then, older than that.
who's that?
Well, we're talking on Erev Purim.
Yeah.
Esther, of course, is raised by her uncle, and Moses is raised by Bat Paro.
Just one
Moses is
second.
raised,
Esther is raised what? She's adopted?
yeah. Sure, she's an orphan. I mean, she has no mother, she has no father, and Mordechai is I don't know. I mean, I don't know how you translate. The word isn't used, right? The way there's no Hebrew word in the Torah for adopted, but Mordechai is standing in as her father. Um,
It could be as a stand-in as a father, as a stand-in as a husband. Who knows?
and the other person is Moses, who's
Who?
raised by Bat Paro,
Who?
Moshe.
Yeah. But I thought
So
I thought
so
that
I
he
think
had
it's
a Jew.
very
I thought
interesting,
that he had Jewish mother of the same sort that Aaron had.
but he's not raised by her.
So what?
I think the point is this, like Judaism acknowledges the people who raise us play an amazing role in raising us, even if they're not our birth parents. I think it's whenever I've done work with people who've been adopted, I'm always
What
more.
is the law? Where's the law that allows a family to adopt a non-Jewish child, or
There's a lot of work
even a
that's been
Jewish child, even a Jewish child?
There's a lot of work that's been done by CJLS, by the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards.
Yeah,
Elliot Dorff, I know, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, Professor Elliot Dorff has done a lot of work on
yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah,
It's not, if you are infertile, it's not a halakha that you must raise a child because you must have a child because you can't. It's a situation of infertility, but it's an incredibly beautiful thing to do. And my time is tight, I'm afraid. Do you have one more question,
Rabbi,
or can we wrap up here?
we need to put the information that was generated by you to some thinking, and maybe if you don't mind, we'll talk about it again sometime in the future because we certainly only started talking about this topic. But as I told you before this conversation, my main interest is to stop us, the Jews, being the nation of orphans. There's millions and millions of halakhic orphans that are being created by our people today. This is Hilul
I mean,
Hashem of the
I would,
highest sort.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I have problems with that. But I would really hope those people, when they turn to their parents, right, who raised them, who who often are, there for them in every single way, they know that they have loving and compassionate parents, and they feel well supported.
They
I
do,
hope
but
that
the
that's the
issue is
case.
not those people, and the issue is not their parents. The issue is us, the Jews who adhere to certain halachic principles, who adhere to Torah, and who do not want to see that our support for the current thinking about these things is Hilul Hashem of highest and the worst type.
I guess the only thing I would add to that, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, is that it's not the only voice of the halakha. And that if you are being
But
treated
there
that
was an attempt
way,
within conservative movement in the United States to do the same, and I think this woman, she's some kind of a feminist, an older feminist. God knows what's her name. You know her name. I forgot her name. Uh, she was the main one within conservative movement. I wanted to contact Dorf. I mean, Dorf, he has a lesbian daughter, and he does not mind having a chuppah for two lesbian rabbis. But children of Jewish fathers and non-Jewish mothers, for him also are non-Jews. This is horrible.
I I I think, I mean, the way that I mean, I know him a bit, right? And I can speak for myself, but I think what I would hope that he would say, and what I certainly say, is that when I meet people in that situation and they say hi, like what I want for myself as an adult is I want to be Jewish. We open up a pathway for them
That's
and we
fine, but
support.
husband dies, mother remains, mother needs to be buried next to her husband in a Jewish cemetery. She's denied the right to do it.
We've got a cemetery in this country.
Yeah, I understand.
I mean,
And
like,
in
we
Israel
have.
also, in Eilat, they have now a cemetery where you can do this thing too. And
And it's it's not a nasty, it's not an out of the way cemetery. It's a place where we bury people with honor. I guess, like, I mean, is it possible to abuse people using religion as a justification? Yes. Is it necessary? No.
but this is the abuse is done not because somebody is doing anything, but because somebody just has a particular attitude. Look at this. For me, a child of Jewish father, non-Jewish mother is 100% Jewish in the same way as I am. 100, 100. Why? He had no choice. His father gave him birth. Now, the halacha recognizes by mother, in the same way as the ancient Roman law, and the same way as slave-based American law, and so that child is Jewish. I mean, what I'm saying is there's millions of people, millions of children, who do not know because in a non-Jewish society they're Jews, and in Jewish society they're not Jews. They're nowhere, and not because of what you do. Time has
Listen,
come.
I know that to be true. If you find them and they're in the UK, send them my way. If you find them and they're in some other city
Just
in
one
New
second.
York,
What are you going to do with them?
we help. We do help. We
They
make
do
people
not
feel at
need
home.
help. They just need your recognition as a Jew. That's all. That's the only need, the thing they need. They do not want education. Many of them are actually became Christians, or many of them just simply not religious at all. It's a difficult process. What I'm saying, it has nothing to do with them. It has to do with you and me, with our
I
understanding.
listen. I hear we can't. I do have to go. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate your commitment to be involved in this work. I think it's good. It's holy. It's important work. And we can make this world a better place, and therefore we should.
No, I'm trying to make not this world better place, but our people to be better people. Anyway, Rabbi, as they say in China, sei gesinnt.
Sei gesund.
See you.